How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, we're going to forecast how active the 2025 hurricane season could be for the Atlantic. And if we were to start straight off by taking a look at the current sea surface temperature anomalies throughout the northern Atlantic, we clearly see the sea surface temperatures are much warmer than average compared to what we typically see for this time of the year. So this is making me more inclined to believe that we're going to be in for more active than usual hurricane season once again, which is very similar to the hurricane seasons we've been seeing over the past few years, where the sea surface temperatures just overall been much warmer than average. However, there are interesting notes to take a look at as well when it comes to this anomaly. The key thing that you might take note of is that the main development region, we see that the sea surface temperature anomalies aren't necessarily as strong right now, where we mainly see right over the main development region areas where the sea surface temperatures are close to the average, and in some cases even below average, closer to the West African coast. Now, this could hopefully contribute to the hurricane season being weaker than normal if we were to see this trend continue, with the sea surface temperatures being cooler than normal over this area. However, when it comes to the rest of the Atlantic, we see that it's so much warmer than average, to a point where I'm not sure if this small area could make necessarily a big difference when it comes to the amount of tropical cyclones we could see. Because even if a tropical cyclone doesn't necessarily develop just off the West African coast, it could very well strengthen over this area where the sea surface temperatures are much warmer. And if I were to show you guys what the climatological models are stating in just a second, you're going to see that they are also forecasting that the sea surface temperatures should eventually rebound over the main development region, and we could see warmer than average temperatures in this area as well, contributing to a much more active than usual hurricane season. So based on this overall, while there could be some hope when it comes to these sea surface temperatures being cooler than average over the western African coast, that it could potentially limit the amount of hurricanes we see. In general, when we take a look at this, it's definitely this will definitely encourage more tropical cyclones to develop than what you typically see during an average hurricane season, which is why I'm a little bit more inclined to believe that we will see more tropical cyclones this season, at least based on this. We need to take a look at other factors as well before we can jump to that conclusion, though, which I'll get into later during this video. The next thing we also need to take a look at is the ENSO outlook over the next few months, as it is one of the biggest determinants in what type of hurricane season you should see based on what ENSO pattern we're going to be at. More specifically, what the sea surface temperatures will be right over the Nino 3.4 region, which is just off the equatorial Pacific coast of Ecuador and Peru. And we clearly see, based on the current probability forecast as we approach a hurricane season, the most likely scenario is that we're either going to be in a neutral phase or a La Nina phase by the peak of the hurricane season, anywhere between August and September. There is a small chance of an El Nino, but the most likely scenario clearly is that we're either going to be in a neutral or La Nina phase. So when it comes to a neutral pattern, we typically see around an average amount of tropical cyclones during neutral patterns in the hurricane season. So this certainly would potentially help potentially limit the amount of hurricanes you could see, at least compared to what you'd see during a La Nina. But there is still that possibility of a La Nina by the peak of the hurricane season, so we can't completely disregard that possibility as well. So taking a look at what typically happens during a neutral phase for the Atlantic hurricane season, we see near normal activity. We see a near normal amount of trade winds because the sea surface temperatures are around average, so there isn't a ton of instability that would necessarily encourage a lot of convergence over this area, which would happen during an El Nino phase that would encourage more dry air as well as wind shear over the Atlantic. Yet it isn't cold enough to the point where there's going to be a strong sinking motion in this area, which would help the hurricane season significantly over the Atlantic when it comes to the amount of moisture that would exist over this area, as well as the weaker amount of wind shear that would happen during a La Nina. Neutral is pretty much self-explanatory. A neutral phase is right in between a La Nina phase and an El Nino phase. So based on this alone, it would be around an average hurricane season. But I think that when we combine the fact that the sea surface temperatures are going to most likely be much warmer than average over the Atlantic, I'll still lean a little bit more to the idea that we're going to see a slightly more active than usual hurricane season. Another key thing that I want to point out that I think definitely could help us when forecasting how active this hurricane season will be is taking a look at prior hurricane seasons that had conditions that were very similar to what we're experiencing now, or as it's typically called, in analog years. So if we were to take a look at the years that are very similar to the conditions we're expected to see this hurricane season, which is a La Nina pattern transitioning into a neutral pattern by the time we approach the hurricane season, because right now we are in a La Nina phase, but slowly entering a neutral phase as the sea surface temperatures are rising over the Nino 3.4 region. Taking a look at those years where that occurred, and I'm mainly using any year that's beyond 1991, because that's when we entered a positive Atlantic multidecadal oscillation phase, which encourages much warmer than average sea surface temperatures over a prolonged period. In this case, it has been happening for over 30 years now, and I think that's something more representative of what we're going to experience this hurricane season, because we're still in a positive Atlantic multidecadal oscillation. So to take a year that was before that phase, such as during a negative Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, wouldn't really do justice when it comes to comparing what we're more likely to experience this year. So the years that really stand out to me when it comes to the conditions very similar to what we're going to experience this hurricane season were the hurricane seasons of 1996, 2001, and 2012. And if we were to take a look at those hurricane seasons, they've all shown a clear trend that it's typically those hurricanes conditions similar to what we're experiencing right now bring more tropical cyclones than average, based on what we've seen in those 3 years. Here's a quick look at how the 1996 hurricane season turned out. So the big thing with this hurricane season is that while when it comes to the amount of storms that develop, it actually was slightly below average with 13 named storms, and the average, at least during the positive Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, is 14. But while it's below average when it comes to the amount of tropical cyclones, the thing is that this hurricane season spawned many more hurricanes than usual, even compared to an above average hurricane season. So although the number of tropical cyclones were lower this hurricane season, it spawned many more hurricanes, as well as even major hurricanes than what you'd expect during a slightly below average year, at least when it comes to the number of named storms. So overall, I'd still consider this a more active than usual hurricane season, due to the fact that it did spawn more hurricanes and more of these tropical cyclones did impact land. So that's something to keep in mind as well when taking a look at the hurricane season of 1996. When it comes to the 2001 hurricane season, however, in general, it spawned many more tropical cyclones than compared to average, where in this hurricane season, we saw 17 named storms, which is above average. And as you can see, we did see some hurricanes. Thankfully, not really no hurricane landfalls outside of this hurricane right around western Cuba. But it still developed more tropical cyclones compared to average, which could give an indication that this year will also be an above average hurricane season, since the 2001 hurricane season is setting out to be very similar to what we're going to experience this year. And here's a look at the 2012 hurricane season, and it was one of the most active hurricane seasons really in history for the Atlantic. And it's a hurricane season that I definitely remember vividly, mainly due to the fact that Hurricane Sandy made landfall in my state in New Jersey in October 2012. But even outside of Hurricane Sandy, we saw plenty of tropical cyclones develop. We did also see Hurricane Isaac make landfall right up along the Louisiana coast in August of 2012. So this was definitely one of the more active hurricane seasons, which also gives me a bit more confidence that this hurricane season will be above average, despite the fact that we're going to be in the neutral phase, because this season is looking, when it comes to the conditions, when it comes to La Nina phase to neutral phase we're going to be transitioning to, it's very similar. So I do believe that that does raise confidence. This will be a more active than usual hurricane season. Now, here's a look at what the CFS climatological model is forecasting when it comes to the sea surface temperature anomalies between the months of July, August, and September. And we see clear indication that the sea surface temperatures will be much warmer than normal. So I do believe this will help encourage more tropical cyclones to develop and potentially more tropical cyclone landfalls as well. Now, that's not the only thing we need to take a look at when determining how active this hurricane season will be. Another key thing we need to take a look at is the wind shear anomaly. So I think it's definitely good to take a look at the 3-month average. So we see that the wind shear is expected to also be weaker than normal during the main months of the hurricane season between July, August, and September, more specifically right over the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, where the wind shear is expected to be lighter than normal. And as for the main development region, it seems like the current forecast is that the wind shear will hover, I'll say, more around average. We should see less wind shear than normal over the northern portion of the main development region, but the southern portion, there could be pockets where the wind shear may be stronger than average, at least compared to what we typically see during the 3 main hurricane season months. So this will definitely be a forecast we're going to need to take a look at over the next few months. Definitely take this with a grain of salt, because this is a forecast that's months away. So we're definitely going to keep tabs on this over the next few hurricane season forecast videos. But in general, for much of the Atlantic, it's not looking good, as it's really, as the CFS model is fairly confident that much of the Atlantic will be under a low sheared environment, which should help enhance hurricane and tropical cyclone development in general. So here's my current hurricane season forecast compared to the new long-term average between 1991 and 2020. Of course, this encompasses the years where we were in a positive Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, which is definitely better representative of what to expect, at least for in this sort of pattern, because we're still in a positive Atlantic multidecadal oscillation. So the average amount of storms we see during an average hurricane season during a positive multidecadal oscillation is 14 named storms, 7 named hurricanes, as well as 3 major hurricanes. For my forecast, I'm expecting it to be more much more above average. I'll say 18 named storms compared to the average of 14, 9 named hurricanes, as well as 5 major hurricanes. Of course, this is subject to change, but based on what I'm seeing when it comes to the sea surface temperature anomalies, as well as what we've seen in analog years, which were years that were very similar to what we're going to experience this year, as well as the fact that the climatological models are leaning a little bit more to the wind shear being lighter than usual this hurricane season, I do believe that will help encourage more tropical cyclone development and make it an above average hurricane season in general. So this is my hurricane season forecast. I'll definitely make sure to keep you guys updated over the next few months when it comes to the hurricane season, as we continue to get more updates from the computer models and the sea surface temperatures over the Atlantic as well as the Equatorial Pacific. So make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more if you want to see more hurricane season forecast videos in the future. So yeah, guys, I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys all have a great day.